26 disturbing internet trends, 7 levels. From kids openly vandalizing schools for online fame, to prank calls that have gotten innocent people killed. These are 26 of the most deranged and reckless challenges the internet has ever given birth to. The deeper we go down this iceberg, the more patterns we start to notice, and they almost always end up in a tragedy. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Devious Licks. The Devious Licks challenge started popping up on TikTok around September 2021. The idea behind it was basically students filming themselves stealing or vandalizing school property. The biggest hotspot for this challenge was usually school bathrooms. These students would essentially mass steal from bathrooms and then post clips online under the hashtag Devious Licks or Diabolical Licks. The things they vandalized or stole were anything from soap dispensers and mirrors to bigger things like exit signs and even sinks. At first, the challenge only managed to bring in a handful of videos with not a lot of views, so a lot of people thought it was just another internet joke that would pass, but it actually escalated pretty fast. Schools across the US started noticing real damage and missing equipment. Some even had to go as far as to shut down bathrooms just to keep things under control. The consequences these students faced were proportional to the damage they had caused. The crackdowns consisted of suspensions, expulsions, or even criminal charges in some extreme cases. Eventually, though, things got so bad that TikTok was forced to step in. Moderators basically started taking down videos linked to the trend and even tried banning and redirecting searches for devious licks altogether. But that only did so much, and eventually the punishments escalated. Schools started charging students, and by extension their parents, for the damage they were causing. This ended up culminating in a lot of money for the ones responsible. So, while the trend did die down after some time, it definitely left a very unfortunate mark on communities as a whole. Barefoot trend. Going back to some of our primal rituals is inherently not a bad thing. In fact, there's a reason why earlier humans possessed certain physical and cognitive advantages over modern humans. They were closer to nature and had a knack for appreciating it more through their lifestyles. While doing that in the current sphere sounds pretty great, there are certain factors that need to be kept in mind before embracing the entirety of traditionalism. The primary one is the fact that the modern framework has made it so much easier for us to have access to safe alternatives for different practices. So, although challenges like the barefoot trend sound fairly beneficial in theory, they can be dangerous. The barefoot trend basically encourages people to embrace naturalism by getting rid of their shoes completely. According to some under-researched claims, doing so helps with posture and sensory problems. Unfortunately, there's a reason a lot of healthcare professionals do not agree with this. First, going barefoot is not the most hygienic act ever. Walking on public sidewalks with no shoes is a guaranteed infection. These sidewalks, no matter how clean on the surface, are prone to having debris, dirt, and most dangerous of all, glass. Hurting yourself on them is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now that TikTok is making the barefoot trend even more famous than it was before, things are escalating. There have been so many unfortunate cases of people getting hurt really badly. Getting splinters or small cuts is essentially the least serious injury one can get. There have been reports of people getting entire rusty nails embedded in their soles simply because they wanted to jump onto an internet trend. Plenty of infections like tetanus, if left untreated, can lead to irreversible damage and even death. So why even risk it? When you have the means to get yourself some shoes, maybe it's best for you to follow convention. Level 2. The Cereal Challenge. The internet is the only place where you can even make breakfast not only a biohazard, but also a cosmically unsanitary affair. The Cereal Challenge was one of the earlier COVID challenges that gained traction in 2020. The premise of it was as disgusting as it was simple. One person would lie flat on their back while another would pour cereal and milk into their mouth. Now, if the challenge simply ended there, it would not have made this list in the first place. Unfortunately, it didn't. The next part of the trend entailed the other person eating the soggy concoction straight out of their friend's mouth with a spoon. In other words, they would literally be eating cereal out of a bowl made from human mouth. Social handles like TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter would feature couples giggling through the mess, while others showcased siblings and even pets partaking in the milky madness. The entire thing was absolutely disgusting, but it's how people took things to a new level. The concerns revolving around the cereal challenge basically addressed its potential choking hazards and the absolutely unhygienic nature. And considering how it became popular in the middle of an already devastating global pandemic, health experts were not amused. Either way, while it did provide some laughs occasionally, maybe stick to an actual bowl next time. Chain mail and texts. Way before TikTok and Instagram scams were even a thing, we had something called the chain mail. These were essentially all-caps extensive spam emails foreshadowing the receiver's untimely doom in the event that they failed to forward the email to a specified number of people. The format for most of these emails was essentially the same. It would warn the recipient that failing to forward it to 10 friends would result in 7 years of bad luck or being haunted by a ghost, or some curse in the same ballpark. For impressionable people, this was basically the worst thing ever. While some of these warnings were blatantly unrealistic and would be seen through almost immediately, others meticulously built a subtle narrative that preyed on a person's gullibility. The fear-mongering that followed was actually very meticulously targeted and would get even the smartest people fooled. Like some cases where these emails threatened misfortune on anyone who failed to forward them. They'd follow that up by quoting the case of someone who actually did die after breaking the chain. Despite these deaths being purely coincidental and having nothing to do with email forwarding, the way they'd be connected would definitely create a sense that the individual had faced their demise precisely because they did not comply with the email's instructions. There was also the other end of the spectrum as well, the one that promised unrealistic reward instead of a sick punishment. Messages like, "Send this to 10 people and your crush will confess to you," were really popular amongst the younger masses. The more they were forwarded, the more their creators were encouraged. It was a contagious internet disease that kept evolving with the evolution of the online sphere. Today, the format has adapted to platforms like TikTok and Instagram. Users encounter posts urging them to like and share to avoid bad luck or to receive blessings. They're basically chainmail in its most modern form, and they continue to feed off of our anxieties like they've been doing for centuries. 3 a.m. Challenge. The 3 a.m. Challenge was one of those internet trends that really blew up through YouTube a few years ago, especially around 2017. The entire idea revolved around waking up at 3 a.m., known as the witching hour, to summon spirits or talk to haunted dolls. The belief was that this was the best time to try and trigger something paranormal since ghosts were most active. A lot of YouTubers like I'm J Station and Ruby Rube jumped on the trend and made videos where they'd try these challenges on camera. Most of the time, the reactions were exaggerated for entertainment, but the setup and the pretend horror movie dialogues made it easy for younger viewers to get hooked. The audience for these videos ended up being mostly kids and younger teens, which caused some problems. Some would wake up in the middle of the night trying to recreate the challenges themselves, while others got really scared and anxious simply just from watching. Some parents voiced their concerns about the impact these videos were having, especially since they seemed to promote fear-based content. Trends like these are a good reminder of how certain internet spaces can reach audiences who might not always be ready to handle it. This is why constant adult monitoring is very important when it comes to content that's superficially targeted toward a younger audience. You never know what it actually contains. Level 3. Orbeez Challenge. Internet pranks can be fairly harmless, funny even, if they're done tactfully without hurting the parties involved. However, with the rise of TikTok and quick challenges, most of these pranks are now being set out at the expense of the general public. The worst part is, some of these pranks are bad enough to not only be mentally draining, but also genuinely dangerous, and a lot of them even border on crime. The Orbeez Challenge is one such challenge that started off as a fun game but ended up becoming a major source of public safety concern. Basically, what the challenge entailed was the participants would use toy guns or gel blasters to shoot Orbeez at unsuspecting individuals. And while Orbeez doesn't really scream danger considering how they're just water-absorbing polymer beads, people actually went to great lengths to turn this harmless fun into something dangerous. For those who do not know, Orbeez are basically small, colorful beads that expand when they are soaked in water for long periods of time. They have a jelly-like consistency after expanding and are fairly fun to have around simply for aesthetic or sensory purposes. However, what they're definitely not are bullets to throw at people. In the context of this particular challenge, those taking part became dangerously creative. They would freeze their beads in order to get maximum impact when using it on people. And like one expects, frozen water beads hitting your body isn't the most fun experience. In fact, there was a point when it got so bad that victims began reporting welts and bruises. There were multiple cases where not only adults but also little children became victims of the shooting by sustaining fairly serious injuries to their faces, necks, and even eyes. Let's not ignore the fact that these toy guns are often painted to look like real weapons. And with most of these online pranksters choosing schools as their stage, it adds an entirely new and much darker layer to the whole challenge. It almost feels like they're deliberately trying to blur the line between a prank and the very real, very tragic issue of active shooters. Needless to say, this is a line that should not be crossed in any reality. Borg Challenge. The Borg Challenge, short for Blackout Rage Gallon, started gaining attention on TikTok in 2023 among college students. The idea behind the challenge was as absurd as it was reckless. It was to basically drink lots of alcohol in what participants claimed was a much healthier and safer setting. To make a Borg, you would take a gallon of water and pour out about half of it. Then you would fill it back up with a mix of vodka, flavored drink enhancers, and electrolytes. It was basically a personalized signature drink you could carry around with you at parties. A lot of people taking part in the challenge tried to pass it off as safe. Despite not having any scientific backing, they argued that adding electrolytes and water made extensive alcohol consumption safer or helped prevent hangovers. They also believed that because you were drinking out of your own sealed container, the chances of drink tampering would be reduced significantly. While the latter idea could be understandable, the first one is not. Reality is, no amount of water or electrolytes in a predominantly alcoholic drink can make it good. In fact, the alcohol content in these mixtures would get even more dangerously high than standard drinks. Some Borgs were made up to a fifth of vodka, which is about 17 standard drinks above safe limits of alcohol. As expected, it didn't take long for the consequences of the trend to show up. At the University of Massachusetts Amherst, 46 students ended up getting mass hospitalized after taking part in Borg drinking. And although none of them received any life-threatening diagnosis, the point was already made. It became a clear reminder that just because something is framed as a safer alternative doesn't mean it actually is. And anything related to heavy drinking should automatically be crossed off a bucket list. Cheating prank trend. The cheating prank trend became popular on YouTube way back in 2016 and is one of the rare ones that gained momentum after its peak instead of fading into obscurity. Like the name suggests, it's a trend where people would pretend to have cheated on their significant other just to capture their partner's reaction. Usually it was set up in a way that would involve planted evidence or staged confessions and a hidden camera to film the other person's response. potentially without their consent. Unlike a lot of other internet challenges that are mostly at the person's own expense or at the expense of strangers, this one crossed into a much more vulnerable space. It targeted people's relationships directly, which made it feel a lot more emotionally loaded. In other words, it fed off of trust and love. Getting cheated on is the biggest nightmare for most people in relationships, so even thinking of staging something like this already crosses a major line, especially considering how the primary foundation for a relationship is mutual respect and trust. The other aspect of how detrimental cheating pranks can be is the mental toll it would take on the one being pranked. Putting someone through such insane levels of emotional distress in such a short time is borderline deranged. And even more so when you realize the victims barely even get the time to process their feelings before they're forced to confront the truth. The lack of respect from the one doing the prank towards the victim is evident in most of these videos. These videos basically show partners breaking down and having full-on panic attacks before being told it's all a prank. And while some couples laugh it off for the camera, a lot of viewers pointed out how manipulative something like this really is. Because at the end of the day, you're messing with someone's trust and emotions for views. Even if it's fake, no one can deny that the emotional reaction following it is real and can have a lasting impact. On the other hand, it's not very hard to see why the trend got popular, because of the big dramatic reactions. But for something as nuanced as a relationship, trust isn't something that just snaps back into place after it's been toyed with. Silhouette Challenge. The Silhouette Challenge is perhaps the first trend on this list that was not destructive in any way, shape, or form, until it was forced to be that. In fact, when it first became popular, it was a positively creative outlet for people to express themselves. The trend became popular after Doja Cat's song Streets was released and basically entailed people posing in doorways. It was essentially a very alluring form of self-expression where people were encouraged to feel confident in their bodies. They would start the video off with them posing naturally in regular lighting and then transition into a red-lit silhouette accompanied by either Paul Anka's Put Your Head on My Shoulder or Doja Cat's remix. The whole point was to create these cool, dramatic visuals where your body outline was the focus and not its specific details. The trend definitely became a safe space for people with a lot of creativity and genuinely impressive transitions. The challenge itself wasn't harmful at all. Like I said before, it was literally only a celebration of body positivity and self-expression. But what made it disturbing was how people twisted it. It didn't take long for some individuals to find out ways to remove the red filter by adjusting the video's brightness and contrast settings. This would reveal what was underneath the silhouette, sometimes exposing participants in far fewer clothes than what you'd expect. Sadly, there were also really horrible cases of them being fully nude. The worst part was that this targeted a lot of women who trusted that the red filter would protect their privacy. And while people were quick to share tips on how to better protect themselves for the challenge, like wearing dark clothing or using more secure editing, the principle, or rather the lack of, behind the illusion of internet safe spaces was destroyed completely. Something that was supposed to be empowering turned into a situation where people's privacy and trust were completely violated. What's worse is, there have been far more horrible challenges online that have received not nearly as much backlash. Unlike those challenges that were actually risky or leaned into shock value, this one was nothing. Yet it showed how even something harmless could be weaponized if the audience didn't respect basic boundaries. Which is sadly a very recurring theme in the online world. It's a dark reminder for us that technology isn't the problem. People misusing it is. Beer tanning. Beer tanning was one of those trends that sounded almost too stupid to be real. Sadly, it was real, and had definitely made the rounds on TikTok recently. Basically, the idea was that if you poured beer on your skin before sunbathing, it would somehow help you get a deeper tan. People doing the challenge even went as far as to claim that ingredients in the beer, like hops, stimulated melanin production, which subsequently made your skin tan faster and more evenly. Except, That's not how skin or melanin works. Dermatologists were quick to point out that there's absolutely no scientific evidence supporting beer as any kind of tanning aid. What's even more concerning, and fairly obvious, is the fact that beer offers absolutely no protection against UV rays. So when people were swapping sunscreen for beer, they were actually exposing their skin to a much higher risk of sunburn, dehydration, long-term skin damage, and even skin cancer. Multiple healthcare experts have since then come out to warn people against this new fad. Dermatologist Dr. Shilpi Khetrapal from Cleveland Clinic specifically warned against it. After stating the obvious, she also reiterated that sitting in the sun can also lead to heat exhaustion and potentially a heat stroke. This trend was especially popular among teens and young adults, which made it even more worrying. That's the age group that's already at a higher risk of developing skin cancer. Tanning beds were already a major threat to public skin health. Now fads like beer tanning are just taking the problem to an entirely new level. Level 4. Dancing on graves. The dancing on graves trend is not disturbing because it's graphic. It's disturbing because it's literally a complete mockery of basic human decency. The challenge basically consists of individuals filming themselves performing extensive dance routines on or near grave sites. Why? Absolutely no reason apart from wanting some negative attention on the internet. After all, every kind of attention online is good. Participants taking part in this are basically seen dancing to upbeat music literally on top of grave headstones. For most of these people, these acts are meant to be funny little bits with no repercussions. After all, technically, they're not really hurting anyone, unlike so many other trends on this list. Even so, it's not very hard to figure out why people find this not only offensive but borderline illegal. You don't necessarily have to physically harm people in order to be malicious towards them. The Dancing on Graves challenge clearly shows how insensitive people can be, especially in the face of death. Cemeteries are grim places, usually limited to mourning and remembrance. They contain bodies of people who have passed away, loved ones who had families and friends. And it goes without saying that using them as backdrop for a comedy challenge is blatantly vile. It crosses a line that many find extremely unacceptable, and they have every reason to. Imagine visiting the grave of someone you loved only to find a TikTok influencer dancing over it for likes. It's not just disrespectful, it's dehumanizing. And somehow it's become a trend. It's self-evident that online fame should not come at the expense of basic human decency and respect for others. Kia Challenge. On the internet, this particular challenge was labeled the Kia Challenge, but we should call it for what it was, auto theft. This one definitely went beyond the scope of an online trend, turned into a citywide crisis in multiple parts of the world. The funny thing is, it's still quite active on social media and has had cases as recently as in February of this year. The challenge first began making rounds on TikTok in 2021 and 2022. It consisted of teens showing their TikTok audience how certain Kia and Hyundai models could be hot-wired using nothing but a USB cable. Many of the previous models of these cars didn't have immobilizers, so they became an easy target. For those who don't know, immobilizers are basically anti-theft security devices that prevent a car from starting unless the correct key or chip is present. And now that people had found ways to circumvent that, stealing cars was a piece of cake. Videos were spreading all around the internet showcasing detailed instructions on how to go about hot-wiring Kias and Hyundais. In some cities, dedicated groups were formed in order to carry out large-scale auto thefts. One such group, known as the Kia Boys, started documenting themselves in the act and then driving them recklessly through neighborhoods. It wasn't long before injuries and fatalities followed. A 16-year-old lost his life in a high-speed police chase when they were trying to recover a vehicle from him. Additionally, there were 5 other teenagers in the car who sustained multiple life-threatening injuries. This case clearly shows the same pattern we've been seeing so far. Most of the so-called perpetrators weren't seasoned criminals, they were teenagers chasing a trend. They had no real understanding of the legal or human consequences, or how far things would spiral. It didn't just result in the loss of vehicles worth thousands of dollars, it led to loss of life. And that's a line that should never be crossed. Extreme selfies. In the current online framework, there's no way taking a selfie is dangerous. After all, everyone does it, and it's literally just another form of self-expression. However, out of all of these extreme internet trends, this one might just be the most deceptively harmless on the surface. In reality, the risks people take in the pursuit of the perfect selfie have led to some pretty tragic consequences. According to multiple reports, this trend has led to hundreds of deaths globally over the past decade. Almost all of them have been because of falling from significant heights, drowning, or roadside accidents. You can't even chalk it up to gross recklessness because technically most of these people were simply trying to take a picture. Where's the harm in that? Estimates put the number to a whopping 480. That's 480 too many lives lost just for a daredevil picture that may or may not even get the poster some traction. One particularly heartbreaking case involved a young gymnast who fell to her death in Germany. Natalie Stichova was having her daredevil moment near Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany when she lost her footing. She plunged down from a 260-foot drop and could not be saved. The thing is, this is just one case among hundreds reported every year, and most of them follow the same tragic pattern. Someone attempts a risky stunt at the edge of a dangerously high place, loses their balance, and the rest is history. Other selfie-related incidents aren't limited to heights either. In some cases, people ignore basic safety and boundaries with wildlife. One example is that of an Indian man who was mauled to death after sneaking into a lion's enclosure for a selfie. He had bypassed the zoo's security barriers and paid the ultimate price. Things have escalated to the point where tourist spots have security measures in place preventing people from taking pictures, even at their own risk. Although the worst part about all of this is that something so obvious has to be said out loud and even made into official warnings. How is this not just basic common sense? When the risks are this clear, it shouldn't take a tragedy to realize that no amount of internet attention is worth your life. One Chip Challenge. Although the COVID years were definitely distressful for the large part of the population, they did give the world a lot of fun, spicy food challenges. The One Chip Challenge started out as one such spicy food dare. The premise behind it was to buy and eat this one chip that had been dusted with Carolina Reaper and Naga Viper peppers. It was meant to test how long someone could go without drinking water. To the challenge's credit, it really was just a fun endurance stunt. People love to showcase themselves eating the chip and subsequently post their overly dramatic, teary-eyed reaction. On paper, there was nothing dangerous about it. However, over time, the challenge started attracting younger participants who did not have that sort of tolerance developed for spicy food. In 2023, a 14-year-old boy in Massachusetts died shortly after taking part in the challenge. The autopsy suggested that he had, in fact, gone into cardiac arrest because of the high levels of capsaicin in the chip. That's the component of chili products and produce that makes them so spicy. Ultimately, the chips makers, Paqui, pulled the product from shelves entirely. The damage was too far gone to be controlled, and the only responsible move left was to halt production entirely, and they did. It was the right call. Tombstoning. Tombstoning is basically the act of jumping into water from high places like cliffs, bridges, or piers. The name comes from the way your body stays upright like a tombstone during the fall. Already as macabre as it sounds, but it gets wilder than that. Although videos online often show people landing cleanly and swimming away like nothing happened, the actual risks here are pretty serious. The issue isn't with the act of jumping itself. Cliff diving has always been a thing, and it's not nearly as notorious. But the risks with both of these extreme sports begin with the fact that most of the time, the diver is jumping into water that hasn't been explored. They have no statistics on it. They don't know how deep it is, whether the tides of the body have shifted, or if there are rocks or debris underneath that could break their safe landing. This is precisely why some people end up with broken bones, spinal injuries, or worse. The cold water shock alone can throw your body into panic mode. It doesn't matter if you're an expert or not, large water bodies should not be messed with. In the UK alone, there have been over 70 serious injuries and multiple deaths related to tombstoning incidents. The trend is basically treated as a casual dare among younger people, especially during the summer months. Peer pressure and the need to fit into society simply blind the person doing the stunt. And by the time they realize how dangerous it actually is, it's already too late. Mouthwash Challenge. The mouthwash challenge is a trend where individuals consume or gargle large amounts of mouthwash, mostly for comedic purposes. This is the one challenge on this list that genuinely sounds grossly pointless. But the truth is, it's actually very dangerous. Mouthwash contains ingredients like ethanol, hydrogen peroxide, and chlorhexidine, which are safe in small amounts, but can be life-threatening if they're consumed in large amounts. As hard as it is to believe, there is an actual condition known as mouthwash overdose. Symptoms of the overdose include nausea, vomiting, dizziness, and in severe cases, kidney failure. There have been reports of individuals experiencing adverse effects after participating in this challenge. Effects that have effectively landed them in the hospital for a large number of days and a massive healthcare bill. Long-term or repeated exposure can also throw off the natural balance of bacteria in your mouth. This can essentially lead to dry mouth, gum irritation, and even more cavities, which is funny considering how this sort of defeats the point of using mouthwash in the first place. And if all of that wasn't enough, let's just be honest for a second. This entire challenge is also just really disgusting and reeks of attention-seeking. Drinking mouthwash isn't bold or funny or edgy, it's just a bad idea medically and taste-wise. Level 5. Swatting. Swatting is one of the more extreme internet trends that doesn't really get talked about the same way as others. That is probably because it's not so much a trend as it is an outright crime. It's literally called swatting because it involves prank calling authorities and reporting a fake emergency situation. The absolutely diabolical part here is the fact that the fake caller usually makes highly dangerous claims. These can easily range from an active shooter situation or a hostage one to an outright bomb threat. Obviously, something of this gravity results in a SWAT team being dispatched to the given location. That location usually belongs to a victim the caller wants to harass or intimidate. The people who end up on the receiving end of this are usually completely innocent bystanders who have just been thrust into a bad situation because of a scuffle online. The most common victims of swatting are mostly streamers and gamers who have mixed with the wrong crowd. Although the issue does occasionally extend to other major internet groups like influencers, journalists, and even politicians. Regardless of the victim, the impact is pretty much the same every time. A lot of mental trauma and physical distress. And that's completely natural, considering how it literally entails having a dozen uniformed men invade your home and hurt you. The most well-known and tragic case happened in 2017 in Wichita, Kansas, where a man named Andrew Finch was killed by police after getting swatted. The caller sent officers to his house claiming that he had taken hostages. The saddest part is, he wasn't even part of the original dispute. The caller was essentially trying to swat his gaming friend over an online bet. The friend in question had given the caller a fake address that led to Finch's house. Armed officers were dispatched, and one thing led to another. Sadly, Andrew Finch, a loving father, son, and husband, lost his life. What makes this so much more disturbing is how deliberate it is. Swatting isn't just an internet prank, it's a literal, calculated attempt to put someone in harm's way. A few minutes of spite from the caller can turn into lasting trauma for the victim. However, even relocating doesn't take away the sheer terror of having armed officers show up at your door over something you had no control over. Thruway Swimming Challenge. Thruway swimming isn't what it sounds like. There is absolutely no traditional swimming involved here. It's a reckless driving trend that made waves in western New York mainly. People participating in the trend basically try to weave or swim across highway lanes at high speeds. They perform these highly dangerous stunts revolving around impulsively maneuvering your car in condensed traffic. Drivers post videos of themselves swerving in and out of cars in tight formations. These clips end up on TikTok or Instagram and are often captured with things like throughway swimming practice. While publicizing these videos may be attempts at flexing some sick driving skills, the trend needs to be called out for what it is: just another shallow grab for attention. Unlike some other trends that are at the expense of a comparatively small group of people, this one puts an entire highway system at risk. Collisions at high speeds on these roads aren't merely dangerous, they're lethal. We're talking multiple deaths, injuries, and monetary damages. While there haven't been any major casualties reported tied to this trend yet, it keeps gaining traction. And if history repeats itself, it's probably only a matter of time before something terrible happens. Level 6. Bird Box Challenge. The Bird Box Challenge kicked off in late 2018 after the release of Netflix's thriller Bird Box. Those who have seen the movie know how borderline unhinged it is with its premise. It basically revolves around characters wearing blindfolds constantly in order to survive a world infested by beings that can hurt them. The entities in question can only harm the characters or drive them to harm themselves if they're looked at directly, hence the blindfolds. Obviously, such entities do not exist in real life, so in order to do the challenge, participants had to get a little creative. The premise of the challenge was simple and, frankly, a bit too predictable. People would blindfold themselves and try to do everyday tasks that were usually pretty easy. They mostly consisted of trying to navigate an area or doing some kind of mundane chore. However, considering the recurring theme of this video, these seemingly tame tasks escalated. People realized how unexciting the trend was in its original form and basically began taking things too far. Like that one case where a teenager in Ohio attempted to drive a car while blindfolded and ended up crashing into another vehicle. Although no one was seriously injured, they could have been. It eventually became so bad that Netflix itself had to publicly step in with a warning. The company's representatives urged people not to hurt themselves in the name of the challenge. And you know it's time to stop when a major corporation that feeds off of internet virality tells you to do so. In another perspective, this challenge was also considered harmful to actual blind people. It was essentially just taking a disability and turning it into a strange novelty. And sure, participants likely didn't intend to offend anyone, but the trend definitely carried a subtle yet undeniably ableist undertone. The way it was framed sometimes overlooked the actual lived realities of blind individuals. Happy slapping. Happy slapping is one of those trends where the name does a pretty good job of masking how awful it actually is. In other words, it's not happy at all. The irony here is this particular challenge isn't even technically an internet trend. It gained traction way back in the mid-2000s and basically involved people filming themselves unexpectedly slapping randoms for shock value. Apparently, the pattern of challenges turning violent is a tale as old as time, considering how this one turned disturbing very quickly as well. In its most basic form, happy slapping entailed someone walking up to an unsuspecting person and hitting them with full force, and another would record it and then share it with their friend circle. Eventually, though, it wasn't just slaps anymore. It turned into full-blown physical assaults with people being punched, kicked, and dragged around. In some cases, it led to long-term injuries. In others, people actually died. The most disturbing aspect of it was definitely the lack of responsibility, followed by zero sense of empathy for the victims. There's a case that stood out a lot and shook the world to its core. In October of 2004, a man named David Morley was attacked by a group of teenagers. The assault quickly turned from despicable to deadly when he was literally stomped to death in the streets. This case, in addition to so many others, shook a lot of people and really brought attention to how dangerous this trend had become. While happy slapping has faded from the mainstream, the mindset behind it hasn't. In fact, modern pranks basically live on the idea that hurting someone can be entertainment as long as it's dramatic and deadly. That is literally what TikTok and YouTube have become nowadays. Galaxy Gas Challenge. Any challenge associated with addictive substances, despite how tame they are labeled to be, is inherently dangerous. And there's no better example of that than the Galaxy Gas Challenge. A challenge that involves inhaling nitrous oxide, or more commonly, laughing gas, from whipped cream containers. The product itself isn't illegal and is mostly just used for culinary purposes, until it isn't. The thing is, if nitrous oxide under pressure is inhaled, it gives the user a minor euphoric effect. Young people and individuals with substance abuse problems have seemed to catch on to that and are using legal loopholes to acquire whipped cream chargers. And since these whipped cream chargers are pure nitrous oxide, they're essentially just legally buying drugs. The Galaxy Gas is basically named after the company that sells these canisters. The challenge itself has become another example of a trend that should have been put to a stop. Instead, it got normalized despite not being anywhere near safe. Videos of people inhaling the gas through these containers began taking the internet by storm. They showed themselves off doing the challenge and simultaneously experiencing the high in the form of dizziness or a laughing spell. However, what didn't get nearly enough attention was the absolutely horrendous side effects of this seemingly safe drug. Like most drugs, nitrous oxide, if taken in large amounts, can lead to devastating effects. We're talking headaches, nausea, fainting, oxygen deprivation, and maybe even nerve damage and death. And because the high is so short, people often take multiple hits in a row. This obviously increases the risks even more. Additionally, it doesn't help that these containers are very easy to acquire and are marketed in very colorful and cute packaging. Even this challenge has had its own set of victims. People have genuinely lost their entire lives to nitrous oxide overdose, both literally and metaphorically. 29-year-old Margaret Caldwell from Florida had been addicted to it for years before she lost her life to it. According to her parents, Caldwell would take hits as many as 100 times a day. She had been to rehab on multiple occasions and had even landed in the hospital when she lost the use of her legs because of the drug. Ultimately, she lost her life at only 29 and left a grieving family behind. Again, not an isolated case. There have been multiple similar incidents where people have either been sent to the emergency or tragically have died. Several doctors and health officials have raised concerns about how accessible and unregulated this stuff has become. The worst part is, this ease of access could lead younger people to use nitrous oxide for experimenting, which in the long run may reveal further underlying problems of substance abuse and more serious consequences. Level 7. Hot Water Challenge. The challenge involves pouring boiling water on yourself or another person to catch them off guard. And if you think that's bad, it gets worse. Some renditions of the challenge also involve people, mostly kids, drinking said boiling water through a straw. It sounds so obviously dangerous, but for some reason, it's still managed to garner an audience. The worst part is, this sort of attention has not only hurt people severely, but it's also claimed lives. One horrible example of a person getting critically burned was in 2018 in Indianapolis. 15-year-old Kylan Clark and his friend had come across the challenge online and were casually joking about taking part in it. Unfortunately, his friend's apparent casualness was highly misleading. Later that day, the friend took Clark by surprise and poured boiling hot water on him when he was asleep. Clark rushed to the bathroom for some sort of relief but could only see his own skin falling off in the mirror. He suffered second-degree burns on his chest and face and had to stay in the hospital for a week. A much more heartbreaking example is that of an 8-year-old girl in Florida who died after being dared to drink boiling water through a straw. She suffered severe internal injuries and passed away shortly after. The pattern in these incidents is as clear as day. The challenge targets young, impressionable people who are chronically online and have no adult supervision. They consume this content and are instantly drawn to it because of their raging curiosity. Out of all the challenges, this one seems particularly upsetting, because there's nothing else to it other than harm and foul play. There can be no version of it that comes without consequences.